faithfully conveying value, interpreting great books from around the world. Hello, this is Sally's Book Club. Today, we're diving into a classic work of communication studies. In previous Chinese translations, it was also rendered as public opinion. We often see this in daily life. An incident suddenly ignites online outrage, and people passionately condemn one side involved. But within days, the situation suddenly reverses. More evidence emerges showing things aren't so simple. Turns out the other party also has issues, so people rush to condemn them instead. Yeah. This momentary public consensus on civic matters forms public opinion. How it forms and veers from truth. That's what public opinion explores. Author Walter Lippmann was an early 21st century American journalist, columnist, and pioneer in communication studies. Born in New York in 1889, he graduated from Harvard and worked for multiple media outlets. He maintained a lifelong passion for politics. Not only did he publish seminal works like A Preface to Politics, but he advised several U.S. presidents. Lippmann recognized early how propaganda and opinion shape society. During WWN, he joined President Wilson's advisory team and the Army's propaganda unit, traveling to Europe to witness wartime messaging firsthand. This showed him how governments manipulate public opinion. Stirring pro-war fervor domestically while silencing anti-war voices, Lippmann despised such manipulation, documenting his insights in public opinion. Published in 1922, the book has 8 parts. Lippmann examines early 20th century U.S. politics and how opinion drifts from truth. He explores the relationship between public opinion and policy decisions. When public understanding skews reality, what should guide our choices? Noted scholar James Carey called it the cornerstone of American media research. In A History of Communication Study, scholar Everett Rogers deemed Lippmann the most influential thinker on mass media's relationship with public opinion. He believed that the news media shapes how people perceive the world, a perspective that profoundly influenced later communication studies. Public opinion addresses 4 core questions. First, why does public opinion often diverge from reality? Second, what consequences follow when public opinion deviates from reality? Third, why can't the media report the truth? Fourth, when public opinion strays from reality, what should guide public decision-making?
Let's explore the first question. Why does public opinion often contradict reality?
As noted earlier, public opinion is the consensus the public reaches about an event. Yet this consensus frequently misaligns with facts. Take a car accident causing major casualties in some locality. Rumors claimed a female driver caused it by driving the wrong way, while oncoming traffic failed to dodge her. Once this narrative spread, the public unanimously condemned the female driver. But soon the story flipped. Police reported the actual cause was drunk driving by the other driver, not the woman's wrong way driving.
Meaning the public's initial outcry against her was entirely mistaken.
Here, public opinion was the consensus blaming the female driver for causing the crash. So how does public opinion form and stray from truth? Lippmann argued public opinion involves 3 elements. First, actual real-world events. In our case, the real event was the drunk driving cause police confirmed. The crashed vehicle's driver was drunk. The second element is called the pseudo-environment. Since people initially lack facts, they piece together mental pictures through hearsay. This mental construct is the pseudo-environment. For example, someone hears distant war is brutal. Though never at the front, they imagine combat through news, books, or rumors. Their imagined battle scene is a pseudo-environment. In the car crash case, the female driver caused it narrative was a pseudo-environment, potentially true or false, and the pivotal step in forming public opinion. When many people mentally construct identical images, those is, identical pseudo-environments, they achieve collective consensus. The third element of public opinion is people's reaction to this pseudo-environment. Because if everyone just silently forms opinions without expressing them, others won't know your thoughts, you won't know theirs, and collective opinion can't form or influence others. Thus, the third essential element is the expression of mental constructs through some action. In the car crash case, people reacted with collective outrage, condemning the female driver online. In the war example, though unaware of actual battlefield details, the public might develop strong anti-war sentiments. People might sing anti-war songs or join protests, reacting to their mental images. That's when public opinion emerges. So what causes this deviation from reality during the process? We'll examine individual and group levels. At the individual level, two main factors cause pseudo-environments to diverge from reality. First is information asymmetry. Communicators may deliberately withhold information from the public. For example, reports claim internet platforms use big data for price discrimination, charging members more than non-members for identical orders. But do these platforms actually engineer such mechanisms? You can't know. Platforms cite trade secrets to conceal their pricing algorithms. Second, even without secrecy, disseminating vast public information is slow. In pre-digital eras, a letter might take a month to reach its recipient. With primitive communication tech, politicians had to deploy massive resources for mass mobilization. Lippmann cites an example in his book. During WWN, the U.S. established a Committee on Public Information, issuing over 6,000 bulletins and recruiting 75,000 people who delivered 750,000 speeches to over 300 million listeners, attempting rapid propaganda saturation. Yet even then, only a minority closely followed the war or understood its details. Busy with daily life, people rarely engage deeply with national affairs, making it impossible to grasp war causes or progress or accurately judge moral complexities. The pseudo-environments they construct easily deviate from reality. All right, we've covered the first factor affecting judgment: information asymmetry. Now let's discuss the second factor: audience psychology. In his book, Lippmann identifies this psychology as stereotypes. Stereotypes are society's conventional views about certain groups, assuming they universally share specific traits. Thus, when encountering these groups, we form preconceived impressions. For instance, many foreigners stereotype Chinese people as exceptionally skilled at table tennis. They might ask Chinese individuals, "Can you play ping pong?" Stereotypes distort how we process information and perceive reality. Since stereotypes are familiar societal templates, people instinctively apply them when interpreting new situations. Take the unfair stereotype that women are poor drivers. That's why in our car crash case, people readily believed the rumor once a female driver was mentioned, partly because cognitive limits prevent deep investigation of every issue, and partly because complexity overwhelms. Even when trying, we can't fully grasp everything, so we default to stereotypes for partial understanding. This inevitably leads pseudo-environments astray from truth. So far, we've seen why individuals struggle with objective views, but public opinion requires mass consensus.
Yet, with diverse backgrounds and educations, how can most agree on anything?
Thus, communicators must manufacture consensus through various means. Communicators could be rulers, organizations like corporations and NGOs, or influential individuals. One common tactic is emotional manipulation. By stirring emotions, they create resonance, making people adopt their views and act as directed. Emotional manipulation takes many forms: telling a heart-wrenching story, showing a striking image, playing moving music, or chanting an inspiring slogan. Why does emotional manipulation build consensus?
It relates to human cognitive limitations.
We know very little about things we haven't witnessed firsthand, like plagues, wars, or disasters we never see. Even with news reports and knowledge, we grasp only fragments of truth. So how could you decide whether to deploy troops? One way is rational analysis, weighing every pro and con before acting. But that's exhausting. We can't analyze every life decision meticulously. So communicators simplify through labels and slogans. These slogans trigger instant reflexes, like the now familiar English phrase, "keep calm and carry on." Originally a WAO British propaganda slogan, meant to boost morale if Germany occupied Britain. Wartime governments lacked time for explanations, no time to discuss post-occupation military comparisons, future plans, or counterattack timing. So the government used such slogans to steer emotions and dictate behavior. Find the right symbolic tool, and you unify disparate groups emotionally. This tool could be ancient totems, modern flags, religious icons, gods, mantras, or famous quotes. Before September 11, many Americans ignored global politics, unaware of Osama bin Laden or Al Qaeda. Democrats and Republicans clashed fiercely. Yet the looping footage of planes piercing the Twin Towers became a unifying symbol. It activated fierce patriotism, uniting people against a common enemy. Lippmann believed leaders are most likely to wield this symbolic tool. With immense power, leaders can mobilize resources to create symbolic representations. This leader could be an individual or institutions serving them. Some might find leaders' slogans and rituals artificial or meaningless. But leaders know only through symbols and rituals can they channel collective emotions toward shared targets, forging consensus. They needn't explain complex backgrounds or intricate details. For example, Nazi Germany relentlessly promoted reviving the Germanic nation during World War II, indoctrinating members. In dire times, no one should hinder our great victory. As a Nazi member, you must participate. By awakening nationalist fervor, leaders easily recruited members for horrific campaigns. All right, that concludes part 1. Lippmann argued public consensus forms opinion, yet it often detaches from reality due to limited cognition, ingrained biases, and emotional manipulation. Thus, people can't grasp facts accurately, relying on emotions to judge right and wrong. So, what consequences follow when opinion diverges from reality? That's our focus today. Second question. Lippmann held that in democracies, public opinion crucially shapes policymaking. Opinion-reality gaps may spawn flawed policies with severe repercussions. In ideal democracies, policies shouldn't be set by kings or elites, but collectively by citizens. Through elected representatives, citizens' voice, preferences guiding public affairs. If citizens understood societal priorities and their full implications, they could make sound judgments and resist power corruption.
But once public opinion diverges from reality, citizens reach flawed consensus and make poor decisions.
For example, if people nationwide believe Chinese mitten crabs are overpopulated and should be eradicated, the government might launch nationwide extermination.
But what if the overpopulation claim is false? Then eradication becomes a catastrophic mistake, risking species extinction.
Thus, public opinion plays a vital role in ideal democracies. Yet human cognition has limits. In small communities, people might achieve realistic consensus on public matters. Like a village where dozens of families know every detail and share values, they could form consensus, reflecting their actual reality. But in modern nations, consensus on major issues is nearly impossible. Modern states have complex affairs with citizens of diverse races or ethnicities in vastly different cultural and geographic environments. Mutual unfamiliarity and conflicting interests make consensus difficult. Ask someone in the desert whether mitten crabs are overpopulated and need farming controls. They might consider crabs rare and oppose restrictions. But lakeside residents would draw opposite conclusions. So, should we control crab farming or not? Per Lippmann, without investigating actual conditions, people think from personal perspectives, unable to offer reality-based answers. Thus, relying on public opinion for policymaking is clearly unreliable. Yet the 20th century saw mass media flourish. People hoped media would reveal distant events, foster cross-group understanding, and enable holistic decisions. Lippmann deeply doubted this, questioning why media fails to deliver truth. This brings us to my third point. Lippmann presented two main categories of reasons.
First, economically. The imbalance between news media and readers forces reliance on interest groups and advertisers for survival.
This prevents thorough reporting of truth regarding public affairs. Here, he sharply satirizes readers' attitudes toward journalism. He noted, His note, we demand truth from newspapers yet care nothing about their survival. We expect this arduous service as their core mission, yet won't spend a dime buying papers, expecting them free. This situation rarely occurs in other industries. Lippmann attributed this to society's differing ethical expectations for media versus businesses. Thus, people expect media to function like schools or churches, meaning they shouldn't profit, yet hiring reporters, printing, and distribution are costly. How can media sustain themselves? So media must rely on advertisers, bending over backward to please audiences with purchasing power. Only then will ads flow. This forces media to meticulously weigh content choices. Will readers enjoy this? Could it offend advertisers? Since readers typically avoid national affairs, few papers survive solely on such coverage. They crave personal gossip or sensational, dramatic stories instead, like neighborhood brawls, celebrity scandals, or local murders. Often readers can't distinguish news from fiction, devouring false reports that confirm their stereotypes. As for national development issues, like international relations or economic policies, since readers avoid them, media underreport these topics, keeping audiences ignorant of full truths. Media cannot provide truth. The second category of reasons lies in the news production process. Lippmann argued that news inherently cannot fully reveal truth. First, media inevitably engage in selective reporting. With limited reporters, media can't cover all events across vast areas, so they must selectively focus on specific venues and groups. Places most likely covered are those tied to public authority: courts, police stations, hospitals, government offices, fire departments, etc. Thus, from the outset, news can't fully reflect social reality, only recording fragments of events. Yet, even for these fragments, news organizations struggle with accurate reporting. Why? Because they lack the technical capacity to reconstruct factual details. Generally, accurate reflection requires meticulous records, like stock exchanges publishing daily price changes and trading data, helping financial journalists track market fluctuations, or customs clearance logs, bank settlement records, corporate transactions, hospital admissions data. With such records, journalists could accurately report daily events. But journalists rarely access precise records, and most news content inherently lacks quantifiable data. For example, news often covers criminal suspects' personalities, veterans' emotions, corrupt officials' motives, or unquantifiable concepts like national sentiment, discrimination levels, or food waste. Lippmann cited an example during the Russian Revolution. Military blockades by Russia and allies prevented entry, and American journalists didn't speak Russian, making accurate information nearly impossible. Even Russian journalists struggled with accurate coverage amid revolutionary chaos and unverifiable information. This reporting vacuum allowed conspirators and opportunists to exploit superficial understandings of the revolution, fabricating narratives to incite hatred, among others. Overall, Lippmann believed we must clearly recognize that news and truth are entirely separate matters. It's precisely journalism's heavy survival pressures and lack of scientific fact verification mechanisms that prevent it from claiming accurate reflection of reality. Since the public can't make accurate judgments on public affairs and media can't accurately reveal reality, entrusting them with public decision-making is inappropriate. And what then should a nation rely on to decide important public matters? This brings us to our fourth question today. In Lippmann's view, sound public decision-making requires separating three systems: information gathering, decision-making, and investigative oversight. Among these, Lippmann most valued the information gathering system, staffed by scientifically trained professionals like statisticians, accountants, scientists, researchers, and social scientists. Their core value lies in using professional skills to gather comprehensive, accurate information and present it without bias. For example, if the U.S. government considered raising the retirement age, it should first convene experts from relevant fields. Experts in labor protection, macroeconomics, microeconomics, gender issues, plus demography and healthcare, all discussing retirement age impacts, pros and cons, affected groups, consequences, and fairness. Experts with differing views should participate and provide judgments. Their task is to sift through biases, stereotypes, and rhetoric to identify truly valuable insights. Only with comprehensive, accurate information can decisions be made. Now, let's discuss the second system in sound public decision-making. Regarding decision-making, Lippmann believed professionally gathered information needn't reach everyone, only key decision-makers. While ideally, if all citizens understood experts' information and reports, they'd make more reality-based decisions on public affairs. But Lippmann argued this is unrealistic. Ordinary citizens can't master all official documents, nor do they have time, energy, interest, or access for professional judgments on diverse matters. Only specially trained individuals, legislators, officials, business leaders, and industry representatives can deeply understand specific issues. They're also more engaged with complex data reports. Though leaders might manipulate opinion with misleading information, in modern democracies, elected officials should represent citizens, not personal preferences, when deciding. Thus, expert information primarily serves key decision makers. For example, in U.S. foreign affairs, the Secretary of State is the primary decision maker. Before diplomatic decisions, the Secretary needs professionals to translate documents, analyze situations, summarize complexities, and report on events in the Far East and their causes. Then, the Secretary and relevant officials formulate foreign policies and ensure their implementation, because without execution, decisions become meaningless.
In the retirement age example, decision makers at the Social Security Administration use expert data to decide whether to delay retirement to 65. Then, enforce it.
But since professionals gather information, not decision makers, two outcomes may emerge.
First, decision makers dismiss experts, rendering them ineffective.
Decision makers might then ignore reality, making arbitrary choices. Second, professionals resent being sidelined and gradually seize more power, acting as censors. This turns professionals into bureaucrats, essentially making players and referees the same person. Thus, Lippmann proposed a third system, an independent investigative oversight mechanism, to investigate whether policy enforcers engage in corruption, negligence, or dereliction of duty. For example, in production settings, auditors, accountants, and inspectors should remain independent from managers and directors. For instance, when the Social Security Administration decides to delay retirement to 65, its enforcers implement this decision. During implementation, they might alter pension contribution methods. Are enforcers lining their pockets while changing contribution methods?
This necessitates audit bodies or similar oversight agencies monitoring their actions.
All right, that covers the core content of public opinion. We often say we're in a post-truth era. People care less about facts, more swayed by emotional appeals. People also tend to accept only what aligns with their views, dismissing contradictory perspectives. Lippmann clarified these phenomena in his 1922 book, Public Opinion, offering the first panoramic analysis of public opinion. Concepts he proposed, like stereotypes and news failure to reflect reality, became research topics in social psychology and communication studies, even entering common knowledge. But a century ago, these ideas were groundbreaking, because in the early 20th century, mass communication technologies like newspapers and radio were rapidly emerging, raising hopes they'd strengthen democracy. Amid this optimism, Lippmann's critique of media and public opinion was profoundly awakening. Since publication, it's been translated into dozens of languages and remains a classic in journalism and communication studies. However, many scholars deem it elitist and anti-democratic. Criticisms focus on 2 points. First, Lippmann completely dismissed public value, contradicting democratic principles. Democratic theory holds that societies should let autonomous citizens decide their lives, not have leaders dictate actions. Second, Lippmann excessively favored professional elites, believing only they should opine on public affairs. This too conflicts with democratic ideals and risks centralizing power. But Lippmann's views weren't anti-democratic at all. You could call him a skeptic, but he's definitely not endorsing authoritarianism.
He doesn't believe the public can only passively accept views imposed by professional elites.
In his argument, experts shouldn't serve any specific interests, but should provide policymakers with their research findings on factual truths through scientific methods. And these policymakers are still elected by the public. Lippmann himself might have been uncertain about this solution, recognizing that experts' role isn't as big as he thought. He gave an analogy. Decision makers are like navigators, but there's no good way to tell who the real navigator is, while the public is like crew members who have no clue what the navigator is actually thinking about.
Once a mutiny breaks out at sea, the crew has no time to judge if the so-called professional opinions are right or wrong.
For the crew, the only effective opinions at that moment might be to shoot, spread inflammatory slogans, or negotiate with the rebels.
In short, whatever quickly quells the mutiny is the way to go, only after it's settled and the ship docks.
Then it's possible to sit down and discuss whether an opinion has enough evidence and accurately reflects the truth. In the book's final chapter, Lippmann wrote, "I've revised the ending of this book multiple times." Anyway, every book needs a concluding chapter to wrap things up definitively.
However, in politics, so-called heroes won't live carefree lives like in fairy tales or have perfect endings.
So this book has no definitive concluding chapter. But Lippmann says we have no right to despair if we can avoid filling our minds with hatred and fanaticism and not act under the sway of anger, not sinking into depression over losing faith in humanity's future, then we can certainly do better. All right, that wraps up our interpretation of public opinion. Listening notes are below the audio. See you next time.